Beacon Pines is a top-down, narrative-driven adventure game that follows the story of Luca, a young boy living with his grandmother after his father passed away and his mother went missing. Teaming up with Rollo and Beck, they find themselves thrown into a disturbing mystery that not only threatens their own lives, but the town and its residents as a whole. I'm going to talk about the story of Beacon Pines as non-spoilery as I can, as I think you should delve into this yourself as blindly as possible. That being said, this is a game that's built around its story, so I'm going to have to cover some of it. I'll do my best to be as careful as possible. The story takes place in Beacon Pines, hence the name of the game. It's a small farming town of a difficult history. The people living here have had a hard time lately. An event known as the Foul Harvest plagued the crops growing here, causing poor harvests and financial instability. The Valentines, a family overseeing the town, struggled to keep everything together, and with the loss of Sharper Valentine, the head of the family, collapse appeared inevitable. But alas, Perennial Harvest comes to save the day, a third-party corporation seeking opportunity and supposedly finding it in Beacon Pines. Their main goal is to bring the town back to its former glory, while also pushing it forward to attain its true potential. Of course, they're completely cool and there's nothing shady about them whatsoever. Look, they even care so much about the people that they will non-stop ask them about their thoughts. Fast forward a few years later to the present day, the town is preparing a festival to celebrate everything that the Valentine family and Perennial Harvest have achieved. Only, not everyone is feeling massively enthusiastic about it all. This is where Luca comes in. Luca is the main character of Beacon Pines, and who you play as. The game opens up with him sitting by his father's grave, who died years before. His mother had also gone missing a few months ago, leaving him in the care of his grandmother. Understandably, he's been feeling pretty lost and alone. Before long, Rollo, Luca's best friend, appears beside him and wants to tell him about a mission he has planned. Both of them enjoy science fiction and frequently play things up to be more dramatic. What I'm saying in the most robotic way possible, they're children. I feel like one of those people with the clipboards. They even have their own treehouse called Mission Control. Pretty neat. Anyway, turns out the mission Rollo has planned is a lot more serious than the two of them realise. There's an abandoned building on the edge of town that hasn't been used since before the Foul Harvest. Luca, seeing this as a potential way to find out what happened to his mother, suggests that they both investigate the building to see what they can find. And this is where it starts to become pretty dark. To preface, I knew nothing about this game going in, so the sudden tonal shift threw me completely off guard. An important fact to know about Beacon Pines is that it can get pretty creepy very quickly. Don't let the art style or cutesy presentation fool you. The mystery shrouding the town is a dark and somber one, with a lot more to it than meets the eye. What is possibly the game's standout feature is the ability to go back in time and change the way you go about things. Before I go into that though, let me dial it back a little bit. Beacon Pines as a whole takes place inside a book. There's a narrator who reads out all the dialogue and actions, but she is also the writer of said book. What you are doing is helping her fill in the blanks. It's a story with many possible endings, most of which are far from cheerful. The goal, I guess you could call it that, is to find the right ending, one where the good guys are victorious and the bad guys are defeated. This means going back multiple times, correcting past mistakes, and exploring new possibilities. This approach to storytelling is fantastic. At first I was worried that it would become repetitive because I thought you would have to go through conversations or scenarios multiple times, but the amount of things that change is staggering. The different narrative paths are incredibly distinct, a couple of which feel like they could develop into their own unique stories. How this system works is something that I will get into later. It's because of these branching pathways that this story is a lot more complex than it appears to be. Near the beginning I had a pretty clear idea of what they were going to do, but that idea got quickly thrown out of the window. Think of it as a matryoshka doll. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. You know, this thing. You think you see it all, but psych, there's more. Because of this, it was pretty hard to predict, and eventually I just stopped trying altogether. In truth, I loved everything about the story of Beacon Pines. It's a tale encompassing many themes, ranging from grief and depression to camaraderie and compassion for those who have been wronged. It's a disturbing and sometimes uncomfortable mystery brought about by corporate greed. While it can become quite a spectacle, it also has introspective moments that are driven by hindered feelings. Speaking of which, this is a surprisingly emotional game. The things it is able to achieve through limited presentation is worth commending. Its visual novel approach to cutscenes doesn't hold anything back. Even without voice actors, you can feel the pain and the drive behind characters during some of the game's more impactful sequences. There was even one case where I nearly cried. Which, you know, I wasn't expecting. There is a lot to unpack, and there is no way I could go into it all without spoiling something. My playthrough lasted nearly 8 hours. That's how much this game has. Every time I thought I was approaching the end, they drop a new revelation that sends you back to an earlier point in the story. And yet, I can't even call that a critique. The game never overstayed its welcome, and that's simply due to just how compelling the narrative is. It helps that the characters are really enjoyable as well. Luca, Rollo and Beck have brilliant chemistry with each other. Luca is compassionate and often finds himself in a leadership role. Rollo is crazy and hyperactive, but also resourceful and determined. Beck is new to Beacon Pines, and she is probably the smartest of the bunch, being able to approach situations from an outside-the-box perspective. Other characters are just as interesting though, some with their own histories that intertwine with the main story in some way. Most of them have a part to play, and they're all charming. Even the bad guys are entertaining. Okay, I've waffled on about this long enough. To conclude my thoughts on the story, it's fantastic. It's not perfect, there were a couple of plot threads that could have been resolved better, but that doesn't detract from an absolutely marvelous experience that has layers of both literary and emotional complexity. As I previously mentioned, the world of Beacon Pines takes place inside a book. In keeping with this theme, everything is designed in a colourfully hand-drawn art style. Everything is 2D, and environments are generally minimalist, with enclosed spaces and simple backgrounds. That being said, every location in and around Beacon Pines is beautiful to look at. Putting the mood of the story aside, the game has a relaxing, laid-back vibe. That can all change at a moment's notice, sure, but that's beside the point. When there's nothing horrible or sinister happening, the town has a nice atmosphere. I'm sure you've noticed by now that all the citizens of Beacon Pines have animal designs. Talking animals wearing all manner of different clothing is a pretty good approach to making memorable looking characters. That being said, the game never struggles with memorability, especially as far as these characters are concerned. That's mainly thanks to a couple of things. The first is their appearance. Just as the environments are finely detailed, so too are the town's residents. The game uses a wide variety of animals, which basically eliminates the risk of having them look too similar to each other. But each wears their own kinds of clothing too, ensuring that they all have their own sense of style. Secondly, their personality is a standout feature that's worth highlighting. I've already gone over the main characters, but there are others deserving of their own spotlight. Dawn is the town's reporter who is looking for her big break to jumpstart her career. She also sleeps during the day because she's a bat. As a side note, focusing on the little things like this is really cool. Another character I liked was Gran, Luca's grandmother, who began looking after him after his mother disappeared. She has a surprisingly large role to play in the story, which I won't get into, but the impact she has on the game overall is not to be understated. There are plenty of honourable mentions I could go through. Cardo, Roxy, Iggy, Nuncreed, these terrifying guys. Each one is easy to distinguish from the other. Even characters that you meet every so often in passing are iconic in some way. There's a woman who does nothing in the whole game except sit in the same spot and read books. There's even a pivotal scene where she's just there in the background, reading something. And yet, even she's still easy to remember. The magic Beacon Pines uses for its characters to stand out in this way, even if they don't leap out at you, is worth special praise. The same can be said for the level design too. Like I said before, the world is split into small sections that link together to make a greater whole. Each one is small, with the whole area fitting into view, so what you're currently seeing at any given time is what you can explore. They're nothing grandiose. If anything, they're just pretty, but they're detailed enough to give you a pretty clear picture of the overall look and geography of Beacon Pines. Most of the paths leading to new sections are unobstructed and visible enough, though there are a couple that could be more defined. There's one next to the entrance of the town that straight up tells you, "This path is uninteresting, don't bother going down there," and you never do. At no point would I consider the simple structure of the level design to be a criticism, however. Each location you travel to is unique enough to remember. I never got lost, and part of the fun I had with this game was wandering around, talking to various characters and seeing what things had changed in these areas since I last travelled there. That's another thing that's worth mentioning. Depending on which narrative path you are trailing through, locations can have their appearances altered, or different characters will be there instead. Details like this are worth keeping an eye out for. You never know what you might find. Right, now I'm going to try and talk about the gameplay. The reason why I sound slightly apprehensive about that is not because it's bad, it's that there's only really a small handful of things to talk about. What you've seen so far is more or less the gist of it. Nevertheless, I'm going to try and sell it to you and explain why it's actually more than enough. First things first, I'm going to go over what exactly the core feature of this game is, and that is the narrative tree. I didn't talk about this too much before, as the gameplay as a whole generally relies on this to push it forward. Part of what makes Beacon Pines entertaining is the ability to go back to previous chapters of the story, and change how you endure certain situations. All it takes is a slight deviation for a completely new narrative path to reveal itself, and you would be surprised just how radically different these can be. New paths are attainable through the use of charms. These are things you collect as you progress through the game. You learn a word, it gets added to your charm database, then you can use said word in a scenario, which opens a new path for the narrative to develop towards. It pretty much is that simple, and when you start off, it doesn't seem like anything groundbreaking. It's only when you continue to play that you realise just how much Beacon Pines actually has to offer. It just keeps going. Like I said before, my playthrough lasted just short of 8 hours. Every time I thought I was nearing the end, something crazy would happen that would end up sending me back a few chapters, only for that new path to lead to a similar conclusion. To put it concisely, the goal of the game is to find the right ending, one that suits the desires of the narrator. In a way, you achieve that through trial and error, while also being provided with an excellent narrative experience along the way. That being said, I want to make it clear that this is very much a mostly linear experience. So for example, the narrative paths you trudge through in the second half of the game aren't accessible right at the beginning. You acquire charms where and when you get them, and they can't be found anywhere else. You do have situations where you'll be presented with a choice, and that you can very much approach in whichever way you want to first, then go back later and pick the other option. That's as much wiggle room the game gives you. It's also only through very specific scenarios that offer alternative narrative paths, so it's not a case of, going to the library before going to the Valentine house. A little detail I like is that the game actually tells you of paths you have already played through. It does this by having a tick next to the charm, so the chances of you repeating things over and over is basically 0. You can also access the narrative tree at any point in the game, so if you change your mind about something, you can go back anytime you want. My only issue in regards to this whole mechanic, I mean it's probably just a me thing to be honest, so I won't give it a whole lot of merit, is the amount of excessive jumping that happens. The sole reason I have grievances with this is that there were times where I found it difficult to remember where exactly I was in the story. There are times where you can get pretty far into a narrative path, thinking you'll find the right ending, only to get sent back from Chapter 7 to Chapter 3. However, this is an alternative Chapter 3, where you picked different options that had put you in a scenario wildly unlike where you were before. Your task is to then remember the series of decisions you made that led you to this point. This I struggled with. You can get a vague idea by looking at the narrative tree, but not enough to give a clear picture. What I will say is that this didn't really hinder the gameplay experience to a significant degree. It's just something that would trip me up every now and then. Despite that, there is something quite fulfilling about going back to a scenario you failed to get through before, only to now have the means to find a way through it, and see what happens next. That's what makes Beacon Pines so amazing, its ability to amaze every step of the way. Outside of the narrative tree, there aren't really any other noteworthy gameplay mechanics. In truth, while it is an adventure game, it's an adventure that's told through a visual novel format, which, in all honesty, is rather fitting for a world taking place inside a book. What you see here is what you get. Talking to other characters, finding things, interacting with the world in the present, with some odd sections here and there that provide a break from the main story, some scenes that involve throwing things. Oh, and you get to beat up a melon. The real fun you will have when playing this game is through its story, by exploring its numerous twists and turns, uncovering the many secrets surrounding the town, and getting to know the residents who live in it. There is so much to see and experience here, and all of it kept me hooked from beginning to end. Before I finish this video, I want to quickly say that I don't typically play games of this genre. I don't like visual novels at all, and I would prefer not to sift through massive amounts of dialogue. Beacon Pines has made me question all of that. It's proof that titles such as these have the ability to reach all kinds of gamers. They just have to have something to show for it, something that makes it stand out from the crowd. For Beacon Pines, it's something as simple as showcasing the power of words. Words have meaning, and how they are used can dramatically influence a chain of events. That is what this game revolves around. Its charm system is more than a gameplay feature. It's a narrative theme that makes you see all of the good and bad your actions can cause. It doesn't hold back on this front. You'll see some pretty messed up things, but it also taps into emotional struggles felt by the characters, whether that's by tackling grief, a turbulent upbringing, feeling tired of life, or having years of pent-up turmoil. There's a grand mystery to solve, but the experience as a whole goes beyond that, and while it may not tie all of its strings into a perfectly neat ribbon, what it has been able to achieve is nothing short of remarkable. I knew nothing about Beacon Pines going into it, and now that I have finished it, I doubt I will be forgetting about it anytime soon. Forget your preferences. Give this game a go. It has a very good chance of surprising you. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to give it a thumbs up. I'm hoping to get back into the swing of things and upload more consistently, but that all depends on how things end up going in life. Nevertheless, I'll try my best. If you want to see more videos like this one, then be sure to subscribe. Until the next one, I'll see you hopefully soon. Bye.